Greetings, listeners. This is Cecilia, and with me is Shanna.
Hello, everyone.
We would like to welcome you back to the second half of our Edgar Allan Poe episode.
Woot woot. In our first episode, we kind of talked about his life and how he grew up.
He was kind of a dick.
He was a firm critic of other people's writings, and he liked to definitely be the smartest guy in the room. Mm-hmm. He had lots of lost love. All of his family members would eventually die of illness. He was orphaned at a young age. His foster parents weren't the best.
No, reoccurring theme of women just wasting away and dying in his life.
A long career of unsuccessful jobs, moving around a lot, unable to keep a steady residence, steady income. Health is failing due to years of alcohol abuse.
Right. His wife is also dying of tuberculosis. So he is in the throes of some of the hardest years out of just a long running of some really hard years.
Yeah.
But however, he's really in the thick of it right now. He is pumping out work at this point
that talk about loss and death and grief.
Right. Probably some of his best work is coming out at this time.
Yep, arguably, depending on what you like Poe for, because he's also very popular for his nonfiction works. He was big in true crime, detectiveness. He was very into medical technology and correct words and stuff. Some of his things get very technical. It's kind of fun. But those are not the stories we're focusing on. We could definitely do a whole nother podcast just on Edgar Allan Poe's more not gory, not grief and loss. He did lots of fun scientific hoaxes and stuff. He was an interesting guy for his interests.
That's fun,
I guess. Yeah. But where we are now is 1846. Virginia has died. So we are a year later. Poe has spent the past year drinking, sick, miserable. Finally, after a year of binging, he declares himself ready to move on and re-enter the world.
Oh, goodness.
Yes. He also is going to reinvigorate his dreams of being his own boss. And remember the magazine he wanted to open and start called The Pen. He doesn't live in Philadelphia anymore, so he doesn't find it as witty. And he thought maybe it was kind of jinxed, so he would try a different name. So kind of keeping on the same play on words, he did stylus, which is kind of another type of writing utensil, which he thought was witty. Big surprise, investors did not rush to his side, so he's going to keep working on that on the sideline.
He's still got a reputation.
Yeah. So the loss of his wife really made Poe feel like he was going to die really quickly if he didn't find a loving wife to take care of him. So he spends the next year seeing 4 different women at the same time because he's trying to find just the right fit.
Vibes. I mean, he's an alcoholic hot mess. Or he doesn't find somebody to take care of him. He's right.
I think it's amazing he finds 4 women that he's bouncing back and forth.
Well... Contestant number 1.
Contestant number 1. One woman he's been kind of corresponding back and forth with. Her name is Jane Locke. So Poe goes to visit her, wanting to move forward with the relationship, only to discover that she is actually 43, married, and has 5 children.
No.
So I feel like he was catfished on that one a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's in his 30s at this point, we think.
He is 38.
Fun.
Yeah, right around there. Late 30s. So she's 43, so older than him, married, still married. What's she doing writing this dude?
That is real. I find that really funny. She's married.
Yeah. So I guess, she wants a little something on the side. So that's not going to work out. But then he sees Jane Locke's relative. It's like a cousin. And her name is Nancy Richmond. And so he goes and tries to sidle up with her. She's 28, better, also married. So no good. So third option. This is a woman named Helen. She is wealthy. She is older. I'm not going to say elderly. She's probably, I don't know, 40s, late 30s, 40s. She has a crush on him for his literary brilliance, and they have this really weird pen pal relationship where they start writing these love poems back and forth.
That's super sweet. I mean, and she's not married.
No, this one is not married. I will give you that. Helen is not married. The other two are.
Contestant number 4?
This is an old flame from his youth, like way, way, way back before he joined the military. And she's upper middle class from her youth. Her name is Elmoira Royster, but she was not that same really cute 15-year-old girl that he remembered. So he's kind of on the fence, but he's still going to propose to her because he hedges his bets, right?
Right.
Like you do. But then he finds out that Helen actually likes him too. So he has never really seen Helen in person. So Poe drops everything, including the lovely Elmira. Well, not really dropped. He just really put her on pause.
Okay.
And he went to go meet Helen. So he's literally going back and forth between all of these women and kind of telling them about it.
Well, honesty is appreciated.
They all know.
Thanks for being a gentleman about it, I guess.
Yeah, it's weird because they all know and they're all okay being on pause while he goes to check out the other women. I don't know.
Vibes.
All right, so we all know me and I love super creepy things. And so here's a fun fact for you. So folks around this time enjoyed walking around cemeteries while on dates because this allowed a quiet, semi-public time for them to get to know each other.
I am also a fan of just meandering around your local cemetery.
I am as well. So it's definitely a pastime in our lives. So I think it's funny that it was a actual very popular pastime. And as I'm reading things, they'll be like, this grave robber was discovered because the busy times at the cemetery when people were walking around.
Oh my gosh.
So like there's lots of mentions of cemeteries being a place to go. It's really fun. So I thought that was a fun fact.
place, man.
Yeah. So
I think we need to bring it back.
I do too. No, because then humans will be there. So no, it's not a fun place.
Also,
Cemeteries are not where you want to hang out.
Don't go there. Bad.
Bad.
Very bad.
Leave them quiet and alone. So Poe takes Helen to a cemetery, and they're strolling and meandering as you do, and as you do on a first date, right? You profess your love and you propose. His relationship with Helen's kind of fun. Let's see who can keep up with this here.
Okay.
Ready? So, she declines to answer him and he leaves the next day. She writes to him and says, I do not love you.
Okay.
And I have a heart condition. I am worried that I would only be able to enjoy 1 hour of our lovemaking, and then I would die from my heart condition. So I would never want to put you through that. He responds with a 12-page profession of love.
As one does.
You don't need to worry about it, girl. I could live a whole life without having no sex with you. I'm okay with this. I still love you. She writes back, no. In fact, I keep hearing that you have a bad reputation and people are saying that you have issues.
Because that's true.
His response was yet another 12-page letter. This time, he accuses her of a bad reputation. He insults her as much as possible. He then announces that he was breaking up with her. He then professed his love and added a lock of his hair.
That's chaotic.
I feel like this whole period of time after Virginia's death, and when he goes back into the dating world, or whatever you want to call this, is chaotic. He bounces back and forth, and he's telling all of these women how much he loves them. I don't know what he's thinking. It's just nuts. He just goes nuts. And then he rushes to go see her. He's tired of writing. He wrote all of this, and then he rushes to her side. He proposes again. He says, take a week, write me a response, it's cool. So, hey, you take a week, I'm going to go hook up with this other chick, Jane Locke, right?
Okay.
Right? I'm going to go there, I'm going to wait there. So you write your response to my proposal to this other woman's house for me, okay? So he goes, he stays with Jane Locke, gets into a fight with them and says, well, forget this. And he goes to Nancy Richmond's house and says, I'm going to stay with you. Then he tells Nancy Richmond, I don't really like the name Nancy. You go by Annie now. Oh. And she's like, okay. He then professes his love for her.
Okay.
Please remember, she is still married.
Right.
But her husband doesn't care. They have this completely asexual, affectionate life where he does his own thing, she does her own thing, and he legitimately is like, if you want her, it's cool, it's fine, I don't care.
Interesting.
Helen writes to Poe while he's at his girlfriend's house that he is professing love to. Okay, let's keep this in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know. I don't know where we're going to go. Annie says, hey, you should go to her because I don't want to be with you. You should go. So he leaves. He then goes into a crazy bender yet again. He starts drinking like crazy, and he writes to Annie and says, you said you would love me. I'm going to kill myself. You should come be by my side. He then chugs a bunch of laudanum, which is basically opium, which is basically heroin, and he went on a 3-day bender.
Okay.
This is all still just a week from the day in the cemetery, walking around. All right, this is not...
A week.
Yeah. This is a rough week.
Obviously, this is a rough week.
Coming off of your 3-day bender, he meets up with Helen. She's like, no, bro. He says, fine, I never loved you. And he stormed off, only to come back at 3 o'clock in the morning, banging on her doorstep. I love you. Her mom answers the door and is dealing with this crap while Helen is hiding upstairs for hours of a drunk, babbling, manic, filthy Poe, right? So finally she comes downstairs and she's like, oh my God, dude, he looks terrible. She says, fine, I will marry you. You need to see a doctor. She calls this dude that lives down the street, this doctor dude, who has been trying to hook up with her for a long time. He is also interested in her. So she calls him.
Super fun.
And says, come check this dude out. He declared that Poe had a cerebral lesion and needed to rest for at least a week. Helen convinces Dr. Dude to take Poe off her hands and keep him at his house and take care of him for that week. So Dr. Dude takes Poe and gets him healthy again.
Okay. It's like, please take this problem off of my hands. And she knows that he's going to do it because Dr. Dude is in love with her.
Yes.
And okay.
Yeah. So I hope everyone has been keeping up with his love affair so far.
The week he has had. So he gets taken in by this dude, spends like a week getting nursed back to health by this dude. So we're like 2 weeks later.
Yeah. So pretty much from that point on, Helen keeps hearing all of these rumors about his bad reputation. He drinks. He has all of these issues. He goes to opium dens, all of these things. And then her mom is constantly complaining about him, but all this does is pushes her closer to him, because you know how they always rebel.
Right.
So over the next 8 months, Poe keeps up correspondence with Annie, right? The other married chick somewhere else.
Who was Nancy, but no, it's Annie.
Because he doesn't like Nancy.
Yeah.
You go by Annie now. And she just says okay. It's not even like her middle name. He just calls her Annie. It's weird. It's weird that she says okay. It's not weird that he says it, because he's a weird guy. It's weird that she says okay.
It's weird that she agrees with this.
Yeah. So he's chatting up Annie, professing his love to her, because he feels safe with her, because she's made it known she'll never leave her husband. So he can pour out all of these weird emo emotions to her, and she's safe because she won't
act upon them.
Yeah. At the same time, she's still trying to convince Helen to marry him. Helen's mom does not trust Poe because he is a poor, beggar, crazy, drunk, drug addict.
Yeah.
So she forces Helen to transfer all of her wealth into her mom's name so that Poe can't get a hold of it. If they do get married, if they don't sign a prenup, if any of these contingencies, she's protecting Helen's money, because that's why Poe wants to marry her, most likely.
Most likely is because of her money.
Probably.
Do you think that was probably the case with many of these women?
They're not
available.
They're not paying his bills, and they're not available. He's still just like,
what does he think he's going to get from those women, I guess?
I don't know. Helen, I see, is the best option because of the sugar mama type thing.
I don't know. Elmira was a choice.
Totally. Yeah. But her parents really said no. That was another thing. Yeah, they were like, no. So,
a lot like Helen's mommy.
Yeah.
Like, give me your wealth.
Yeah.
And then you can continue to marry him, because we've agreed to it.
Yeah. So after 8 months of wearing her down, she's like, fine, let's move on with the wedding. But then Helen gets yet another freaking letter saying, dude. Okay, so all of this time he's like saying, I'm not drinking anymore. I love you. I'm going to be a changed man for you. And this letter basically says, Poe is still drinking. He's lying. He's still the same dude. So don't marry him.
Yeah.
So she gets really, really upset. You know how earlier she mentioned she had a heart condition? She could only have sex with him for an hour before she would die.
Correct, yeah.
So back then, a common treatment for her heart condition, whatever it was huffing ether. So it's kind of like chloroform, kind of like laughing gas, kind of like something that just made you feel good.
Some good old hippie crack.
Yeah. So she got really upset after hearing that he was drinking again, and she inhales a bunch of ether and she just passes out. Her mom is like, that's it. I'm done with you. She throws Poe out. They break up. They're all done. But the wedding announcements still go out.
Oh, somebody forgot to call them.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
So now Helen and her mom are bombarded by the public. Don't do it. He's a train wreck. And then they're making comments in society pages. Oh my God, that old woman will marry anyone. She's so desperate she'll even marry Poe.
No.
So people are starting to trash her and her mom and trashing Poe. And so she is a wreck. Poor guy, poor girl, poor woman. Poe leaves wreckages of people.
For reals. Just destroys people. All right.
So she obviously, everyone has canceled the weddings and stuff. He goes back to his cottage with his elderly mother aunt, Muddy. Right? And he is known to write at this time, my sadness is unaccountable. Nothing cheers or comforts me. My life feels wasted. The future a dreary blank.
You know, that sounds a lot like my teenage diary.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, we all feel this way at some point.
Right.
He's lost everything. He's just had 4 women tell him no.
Right.
Well, because you're a mess. But yeah. At this time, Muddy is known to write, "I wish we were both in our graves. It would be better."
Oh,
So this is around April 1849. They're both sad, depressed, poor, sick.
that is sad. Well, I mean, her daughter.
Yeah. She lost her daughters. She's stuck with this dude that can't support her.
Can't get his shit together.
For
at all.
real. I love him, but man, he's a mess. Like,
Yeah.
poor Muddy. But she's encouraged a lot of it too. So by June 1849, Poe is trying to get back into business. He's trying to pay some bills, stuff like that. So he goes to Richmond, and he's going to be there for just a couple days. But when he arrives there, it turns out that there's this huge cholera outbreak, and he is forced to stay there for 2 weeks. So during these 2 weeks, he writes back to Muddy saying that he is sick with cholera, and he took this medicine called calomel, which is a mercury-based medicine, which caused him to hallucinate. He was then jailed for intoxication. So it's really unclear if he really did get cholera or if he was trying to treat his anxiety with alcohol. He went on a hallucinating bender. He loves laudanum. He loves opium. He loves this calomel. We all know how mercury does.
So he just had a wild and crazy time.
He sure did. Here's another fun fact. This episode's riddled with them. I just love it. Calomel was probably the same mercury-based medicine that Elizabeth Bathory's cheating-ass husband died of while treating his numerous STDs.
I was going to say, I mean, we know all about cholera outbreaks.
And mercury treatments. That's right. Here at Histories Uncharted, we bring you the real scoop.
Heck yeah.
So during this period of time, after his 2-week bender, he's showing up at people's houses and businesses that he knew. He's begging for money. He's begging for work. One time he shows up in front of this dude and he only has one shoe on. He's not eaten in days, so he's real thin. He's real pale, kind of crazed looking, dirty, He's like, that's it. I need to go home to Baltimore. So 4 a.m., Thursday, September 27th, Poe boards a steamer leaving Richmond, and he's going home to Baltimore. He's going home to Muddy, right? October 3rd, 1849, Poe was found in Baltimore in great distress and in need of immediate assistance. He was taken to Washington Medical College, where he died on Sunday, October 7th, 1849, at 5 o'clock in the morning, under mysterious circumstances at the age of 40. Nobody knows what he was doing in Baltimore, where all of his belongings were, why he was not wearing his own clothes, or what happened to cause his death. Newspapers at the time reported Poe's death was congestion of the brain or cerebral inflammation. But these were just common euphemisms for death from disreputable causes such as alcoholism. His actual cause of death remains a mystery, and his medical records are missing. This huge literary figure that is a common household name in today's society had a short 3-minute funeral service held the very next day before anybody could even be told of his death. Only 7 people were in attendance, and none of them was his ex-fiancée, Helen, or his Aunt Muddy. So he was buried alone.
All by himself.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the life of Edgar Allan Poe and the very sad and abrupt, mysterious death. His works influenced authors like Arthur Conan Doyle, H.P. Lovecraft, and Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, that's just touching the tip of the iceberg.
Oh,
Everyone,
absolutely.
has great interest. There's been many, many people that have been inspired.
If you are a writer of the horror genre,
Right.
like that is one of the leading starts.
Yeah, he is like
sure.
the father of
If you're modern,
if
you're a modern day horror writer of horror, I would say.
You've been exposed in one way or another to someone that has been influenced by Edgar Allan Poe.
Right.
Yeah. Throughout his life, Poe oscillated between periods of depression and alcohol abuse. He was constantly in debt and begging money from relations, and he perpetually blamed his misfortunes on others.
Yeah.
Well, that's his life. And as we promised in the last episode, we are also going to discuss his works. As we have said numerous times, he was exceedingly talented at writing nonfiction, science fiction, true crime, and detective stories. But today, we are discussing some of his 117 works, only the ones that focus on lost love and the inescapability of death.
Which makes sense, considering really is the common theme of this poor man's life.
It really is. So these next few works are about lost love and inexpressible grief. So in 1842, when Virginia first gets sick, he wrote a work called Life in Death, or Oval Portrait. He likes to go back and rewrite things and kind of modify them.
Right.
So this is about a painter begins to paint his young, beautiful bride begun to fall ill. He is painting with such realism, and he becomes obsessed and focused with his art. He does not notice that her life force is literally draining away as he paints her day after day after day. When he is done, he looks at the painting and says, "It is the image of life itself." And he turns to look at his beautiful bride, and he sees that she has wasted away and died, and said, "No, it is death."
So he was so obsessed with catching the image of this beautiful bride who he knew was dying.
Yeah, so she could be forever immortalized. It's very like Dorian Gray-ish.
Yeah.
Suck the life force right out of her.
Right.
Yeah. He never even noticed she was wasting away right next to him.
That's so sad.
Yeah. 1845, The Raven, as we all know. This is a story of a man trying to take his mind off of the death of his beloved Lenore when he is disturbed by this raven that keeps saying nevermore when asked when will he be reunited when his love and stuff like that. He is a tormented man with loss and grief, just like Edgar himself.
There's something that will never come.
Yeah. 1847, Ulalume, and I know it's Ulalume because it's a poem and it rhymes with tomb. So I got called out on that, but I was like, if it rhymes with tomb, it's got to be Ulalume, right? Otherwise,
Lume?
Yeah, I don't know. But it rhymes with tomb in his stanzas. So his stories often begin with a person that like regains consciousness or gains awareness to the situation or the location that he has found himself in. And this is very much like this. So this man becomes awake and discovers himself on this cold, blustery October night, and he looks around and he's in a tomb. And as his memory is piecing together his thoughts and he's remembering what is going on, he finds that he is in the tomb of the young bride that he had lost a year before. And it turns out that his broken heart had unknowingly led him back to her.
That is like the saddest thing in the whole entire world.
Yeah.
That he went on some chaotic, like, insanity and totally blacked out in his grief.
I can see Edgar going on a drunken bender and coming conscious and looking around and realizing that he's at Muddy's grave or Virginia's tomb. You know, like this is something that he could see himself doing.
Well, and I think that he probably did experience that a lot because he did go on those drunken benders. And I imagine that a lot of the times
he just woke up.
It makes sense that that would be a reoccurring theme. And something that was probably very terrifying for him.
Right. And then, so you don't know where you are, what has happened, and your brain is slowly piecing it together. That could be very terrifying. Yeah, I totally get that. So 1849, Annabel Lee. This is definitely a very popular poem. A lot of people know about. This is where a man loses his love at a young age, and he buries her by the sea. And every night he just goes and lays down next to her and laments her death. And it's a simple poem, and it's just so sweet and sorrowful and longing.
Right.
So this one was in 1835, so it's actually before Virginia got sick. But I just think it's really fun because it always goes back to he had the death and the loss. He also had this fun scientific side of him. He really enjoyed medical equipment, procedures, anatomy, how bodies decayed. He was very technical with his descriptions of the decaying flesh in his, things like that. So this is Bernice. It's kind of fun. This is the same year that he gets to marry his own cousin. So he's very excited. Maybe he's trying to legitimize the whole cousin thing if he writes about it and people like it and maybe give positive support. Who knows? That's just me throwing it out there. But Bernice, a man is finally able to marry his cousin. Her name is Bernice. However, big shocker, she is emaciating with a disease. Right.
Surprise, surprise.
Right. So he marries her. She gets sick. She's slowly wasting away. Very common thing. He also suffers from a disease which he calls monomania, where he can think of nothing but her teeth. The teeth, everywhere I turn, I am tortured by her teeth. Before they can wed, she dies. He follows her into the tomb and removes... Oh, pause. Okay. Before they can wed, she dies. He goes on a drunken bender or a fugue state, whatever. He goes into her tomb and removes all 32 of her teeth. It turns out that she was still alive during this process. And
oh my God.
He finds out because he's being woken up by a servant coming to tell him, Master, the mistress, she's alive and she's bleeding and somebody has, and as they're looking around and he's coming to, they see that he's covered in blood and he's holding this box of her teeth.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So he goes insane and thinks that she has died.
No, they all think she's died.
I
think that's another. We're going to talk about the premature death. I think it's in the science and before medicine and stuff like that, people can be unconscious and they thought they were dead and they were buried alive.
But in actuality,
they weren't. Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of a thing. And so they thought she was dead and they entombed her. And he, in a drunken or a fugue state, went and pulled out all of her teeth because he had to have them.
Oh man!
And then she woke up screaming, and the servants went and found her screaming and bloody and toothless, and they went to go tell him, and there he was.
Wow.
So that's Bernice. I think that was fun. His stories are fun.
I guess that's what we call it.
I do. That's why it's always gripped our fascination and our attention. So he's had some that really focus on the inescapableness of death. He is surrounded by death. People die all the time. There's still not antibiotics, in hospitals that do more than just butchery. So death is around a lot. So he wrote this one. It's called The Mask of the Red Death in 1842. This is probably in response to seeing Virginia just constantly coughing up blood. There's a lot of blood with tuberculosis. So in this story, a mysterious disease has captured this anonymous country, and all of the victims suffered sharp pains, sudden dizziness, and their very pores began to bleed, and they all died in about 30 minutes.
Ew.
The redness and the horror of the blood.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds a lot like symptoms of TB, except in TB, they bled from their mouths, not their pores. That's weird, but, So, to get away from the plague and all of those annoying dying peasants, the prince and 1,000 of his friends lock themselves up in a castle and basically party every night. They think that themselves are immune from the illness. They have musicians and dancing girls and all the food, all the wine, and they're just living their best lives. So one day, after like 6 months of quarantine together, the prince throws this really fancy masquerade ball. And after partying for a while, they start to notice this guest is dressed as Death, but they made it red, all bloody, like the Red Death, right? And so the prince goes to attack him, like, "What are you doing here, you ruffian?" And he just falls down dead. All of the guests start to succumb to the illness, and they all just die where they were dancing in their beautiful costumes. As the fires that lit the halls went out one by one, darkness and decay and the Red Death held limitless dominion over all.
Oh my golly. So help me unlock a core memory. When I was in high school, I recall seeing a movie, and I feel like it was about the mask of the Red Death. Was this done? Do you know if it was
could
done
be.
as like...
There's lots of the masks of princes, and there's there's lots of things that are similar to this.
I feel like there's something out there.
His works have been remade into plays and movies over and over and over again. I would not be surprised if you found something that was similar to this.
Oh, absolutely insane. It was the masquerade ball that, like, when you started talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I have seen this.
Masquerade balls are a big theme in art. It would have been
a 70s movie, like really old, like the Iliad, when they did that and stuff, the Clash of the Gods and 1970s magic.
They were. And, masquerade balls are very thematic and dramatic, and you have costumes, and so it's a big remake opportunities.
Yeah. All right. So, and then one of my favorites is 1842's The Pit and the Pendulum. So this guy had finished being tortured in the Spanish Inquisition and has been sentenced to death. So first he is placed in a completely pitch black room, and he wanders the circumference and discovers this huge pit in the middle. And the intention was that the accused would not see the pit and then would fall to their death, right? They're in this pitch black area.
Can you imagine just falling? You don't even know.
Correct.
You don't even know. You just fall. You're trotting along.
Yeah.
That'd be terrible.
Wake up, find yourself in this random scenario again. And immediately fall to your death in this pit. But he doesn't. So he eventually wakes up tied to a table that has this huge sharpened pendulum swinging above him, slowly lowering to cut him in half. Imagine my 8-year-old brain consuming this information. I was riveted. Hey, I had only done Goosebumps guy.
R.L. Stein.
That was my introduction to horror, and Poe just kind of took me by the hand and said, "Come."
He does a lot of gore and stuff, but I think one of the things about The Pit and the Pendulum and some of his other stories is it really draws out on the anxiety and the fear. It's not slashing through him and there's blood and he's seeing his intestines and the slow death. It is I've been watching this for days. I'm about to lose my mind. And oh my God, what's going to happen? And you just feel this anxiety building and building. And I feel like that's really where the fear and the tension is in some of his stories. Yeah.
So we have an expert that I'm going to Excerpt. We have an excerpt. Excerpt.
That's weird.
An excerpt is a weird word, but we've got one. And I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. Oh, to the long hours filled with horror, during which I counted the rushing oscillations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with a descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages. Down, and still down it came. Days passed. It might have been that many days passed before it swept over me so as to fan me with its acrid breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed. I wearied heaven with my prayers for a speedy descent. Then, when it is about 3 inches from his chest, I gasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its every sweep. My eyes followed its gleaming silver with the eagerness of despair. Death would have been a relief. Oh, how unspeakable.
So ultimately, he's able to escape because he uses the food that his jailers feed him to smear grease all over his bondages, and the rats chew him free. Now, but this next excerpt that Cecilia's going to read is more for me because it freaks me the fuck out, the thought of what is going to happen to this man. Enjoy.
Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood. They overran it and leaned in the hundreds upon my person. The measured movements of the pendulum bothered them not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed straps. They pressed. They swarmed upon me in ever-accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat. Their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging pressure. A disgust, for which the world has no name, swelled in my chest. Yet I knew in 1 minute the struggle would be over. I already could feel the loosening of my bonds. With more than human resolution, I lay still.
That's so disgusting.
It is so disgusting to have that be your savior.
To lay still. Could you lay still as hundreds of rats climbed all over your body?
If it meant living.
Right.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah.
So, he gets free. The Inquisitors are thwarted yet again. So in a very gothic and dramatic way, they start to heat up the metal walls of the cell that this guy is in, and then they start to shrink. So the walls are really hot, and the room is shrinking, and it's to ultimately force him into the pit. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, not the pit. And then at the very, very last minute, the door flies open, and the room goes back, and the French rush in and rescue him, and the Spanish Inquisition is over.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So that was a very terrifying piece called The Pit and the Pendulum, which has been redone so many different times in so many ways.
It really is. But man, that...
The rats get me more than the pendulum.
it's all of it.
Yeah.
You know, all of it really just blew my mind.
Your little 8-year-old mind.
Way open to the world. And I was in shock and awe.
Yeah. 1844. This one is the premature burial. This was a phenomenon that had happened, you know, like I said earlier, people got buried alive quite often, and they contrived different things like strings attached that they were buried with that had bells above ground so that you could ring the bell if you were still alive and they could come and dig you up. So this was a fear that was fairly common for people. So he kind of tapped into that for people like me, that this really does bring the anxiety. So here we go. The unendurable oppression of the lungs, the stifling fumes of the damp earth, the clinging of the death garment, the rigid embrace of the narrow house, the blackness of the absolute night, the silence like a sea that overwhelms, the unseen but palpable presence of the conqueror worm. These things, with the thoughts of the air and the grass above, with memories of dear friends that would fly to save us if they were but informed of our fate. These considerations are carried into the heart, which still palpitates, a degree of appalling and intolerable horror from which the most daring imagination must recoil. Now, this dude wasn't really buried alive. He was just really scared of it. So one day he awakens in the hull of a ship and he thinks that he is, but he isn't, it turns out.
Oh my God.
And it's really cool. He just like makes this decision to not be afraid anymore. And like the last lines are, he goes off and lives his best life. Not afraid of it anymore. Yeah, he's overcome his fear.
But wait, no, it's just a ship.
Yeah, but that's always the premature burial gets me.
Well, I mean, once you've lived it, you're like, well, it really can't be that bad then.
Whew, yeah. I thought this one was a fun one. 1845. The facts in the case of M. Valdemar. So this really hits on like the grotesquerie and the shock value that he felt people were really wanting and were interested in. So this is a story about a hypnotist. Again, those new upcoming scientific things that are coming, hypnotism, mesmerism and stuff is just now coming to light. And it's almost a science, pseudoscience. It's very pop culture. Edgar Allan Poe's very pop culture for the time. Really.
I dig that. That's fun.
So it's a hypnotist, and he wants to see what the effects of hypnotism would be on the moment a person dies. So he finds this man that he knows that is dying of tuberculosis, because everyone is dying of tuberculosis, and he hypnotizes him right at the moment of death. He keeps this man in a sort of suspended animation for 7 months, where he can barely talk through a mouth that is frozen in death, until he tries to wake him up, and his whole frame at once, within the space of a single minute, or even less, shrunk, crumbled, absolutely rotted away beneath my hands. Upon the bed, before the whole company, there lay a nearly liquid mass of loathsome, of detestable putrescence.
That is disgusting.
Yeah.
I love that, though, that, like you were saying, he's a dude on the pulse of pop culture.
Yeah. So, this is what those uptight Victorians, button-nosed Christians wanted. Death and decay and shocking things.
Something worse than what they were already experiencing, you know? So what they were experiencing wasn't so scary.
Yeah.
You know, I think that that's a core foundation of horror genre in general, is give them something scarier than what they have to live in.
Yeah.
You know?
I agree.
Give them some escape.
So he also has a lot of stories that have to deal with like being haunted, with guilt, maybe those that have committed atrocities towards other people. And I think this might tie back to his benders, his drinking, his loss of control, and kind of how he processes that. The first one is 1843, very familiar tale, The Telltale Heart. This tells of how a man has committed the perfect murder to the old man because he had a pale blue vulture-like eye, and that is why he must die. So he dismembers the body in the tub and he buries it under the floorboards. Soon he hears what he believes is the sound of the old man's heart. When the police come to inspect the missing man, the narrator freaks out and confesses in order to make the beating of the whole old man's heart stop. So this is just redolent of guilt and wanting things like that to stop, wanting the guilt to stop. Another one that I think shows how Poe struggled with his alcohol and his feelings of guilt when he was out of control during his benders and all of those actions that he did while he was inebriated.
Right.
And that's really expressed in The Black Cat, 1843. This one really freaks out a lot of people. So he's a really good guy. He loves animals. He always has them around. He's married to this beautiful, amazing wife that he loves so much. But all of the sudden, and it's a lot like Poe, he blames it on something else. It's his drinking, but it brings about the fiend intemperance. And intemperance is like what their words for being a jerk. So the fiend intemperance would take over and he would begin to use intemperate language with his wife. He even caused her personal violence.
Oh my.
So he's getting drunk. He's being aggressive, abusive, physically violent. And then the cat that he loves so much. This is his beloved cat, his little black cat. He bites him on his hand because he's drunk and he's angry and he's loud. And all of a sudden, the fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take flight from my body, and a fiendish, gin-nurtured malevolence thrilled every fiber in my being. He ends up cutting out the cat's eye. He's super guilt-ridden, but eventually says, I plunged into excess and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. So it's like he soothes himself with alcohol. Then, days later, he tries to kill the cat, but his wife stops him. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without so much as a groan.
Oh, God.
He then takes his wife's corpse and he walls her up into the wall. He bricks her up into the wall of the cellar, as one does. And eventually the cops come to investigate the disappearance of his wife. And he's about to get away with it, just like in the Telltale Heart. When all of a sudden, and they're about to leave the cellar, when all of a sudden there's this sound. A voice from within the tomb, a cry at first, muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly inhuman. A howl, a wailing shriek, half of terror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, from the throats of the damned in their agony, and of the demons that exult in their damnation. Turned out he had walled that damn cat up with his dead wife.
Oh, no way.
Yep. And let the cat out of the bag, and he got caught.
That's such a good tale. It was a good one.
Yeah. This one's really weird and really short. 1845, The Imp of the Perverse. It's a weird title, and it's a weird title.
Yeah.
Okay, so this dude kills another dude by making a candle that produces toxic flames. Okay? Fumes from the candle kill him. Yeah.
Cool.
So this man is reading in bed one night, and he appears to have died from natural causes. The murderer ends up getting the dead man's house and all his wealth, and he lives happily for years. But the guilt eats away at him, and one day he becomes obsessed with the idea of confessing. Like, what would it be like if I confessed? What would I say? What would I say? And all of a sudden, he just goes and confesses, and he's immediately tried and executed.
What?
Yeah.
So another really good one is the cask of Amontillado. Did I get that right?
Amontillado.
Amontillado is the cask of Amontillado in 1845. I think this kind of explores that finding yourself in a situation where this is where you're just going to die. Like being buried alive.
Yeah.
So a man is slighted by another. So there's a bit of this theme of revenge, right? So he's slighted by this other man after finding him drunk one night. He decides to lure this drunk dude back to his place with the promise of this amazing Amontillado wine. And once in the lowest levels of his cellar, he chains him and then bricks him in and then lets him starve to death.
That would be terrifying.
That would be terrifying.
I'm hungry. Do you know what I would hate worse? I think about this a lot, and I think about it a lot more after reading a lot of Poe, doing my research.
Right.
Don't judge me, people. But if I was walled up, bricked up in a wall, the worst part would be having to pee my pants. I feel like all of the rest I guess, live or die with because you have to, but...
I do like quiet alone time.
I do too. I don't think that would be like the world's worst way to go.
Right.
But if you could, I guess, maybe catheterize me and have it running out.
And then, I mean, after a certain period of time of not eating, you just kind of stop being hungry.
Yeah.
The thirst would be really terrible and unmanageable to deal with.
But you do get to start hallucinating.
But you do.
And after a while, you stop peeing as well.
So maybe the smell will just kind of dissipate. And
well, you get used to it.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. I know that those are the weird thoughts. Those are my weird shower thoughts, folks. Mm-hmm. Peeing yourself walled up.
Yeah. I heard a rumor that he was kind of obsessed with orangutans.
I think all modern humans at this point, I don't want to say Europeans because he is from America.
Right.
But a lot of people were obsessed with orangutans. So we're still exploring all of these far out places and jungles and continents and discovering new lands and peoples and foods and creatures. And one of these creatures that was discovered was this orangutan, this really cool, orangish red, hairy, smart primate dude.
Right.
Really grabbed the attention of everyone. And Poe has him in a couple different stories. One is in the Murders at Rue Morgue that we had discussed earlier. Mm-hmm. And the other one is in Hop Frog, which I thought was interesting. So 1849, you gotta keep up with this. Is not the most politically correct story. So we're gonna go with that. Okay, so there's this court jester that happens to be a dwarf, okay? And he's kind of malformed, so when he walks along, he kind of hops. And so the king calls him Hop Frog as an insult, this poor guy, court jester. And then there's this beautiful dancing girl that was caught as a slave, and she was forced to be in the king's court to dance and perform, and all of these creepy old dudes always leered at her. And Hop Frog and the slave girl became friends. So there is this cruel king and his main 7 advisors. Uh-huh. So they're having this, they're around the table having a meeting one day, and the king struck the girl. And this jester really vowed revenge. He's like, that's it. That's it. And their topic of discussion was, what are we going to be for the very fun masquerade ball? Again, masquerade balls. Right. That we're throwing. We need to have the coolest costumes. What should we do? And Hop Frog suggested you should all dress as orangutans. We could kind of tar you and then cover you with like a muslin, kind of to make hair, sort of.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then I think it would be awesome if all 8 of you were chained together when you came in and you all acted like orangutans and you could kind of freak people out. And the king loved it. He's like, this is great. We're going to throw a prank.
Right.
We're all going to be orangutans. We're all going to be chained together, tarred and covered with this weird stuff that looks like fur. And they're excited. So in the middle of the masquerade ball, these guys pop out and they're all like dancing around and everyone's like, oh, oh.
Yeah.
And Hop Frog like hops along and hooks a hook to the chain that is attaching all of these men. And then he pulls them up into the center of the room from this chain. So now these 8 men are dangling above the dance floor by this chain, chained together, tarred with muslin as orangutans. And then for fun, Hop Frog sets them on fire because they're covered in highly flammable stuff per his suggestion.
Well, they smacked up his slave girl, so
Totes.
his dancing slave girl. So what the heck?
Well,
justification.
While this was going, cute slave girl was locking all the doors and locking everyone into the ballroom. Hop Frog swings along, picks up cute little slave girl, and they pop out a window that's like up top by the roof or whatever, that no one else can get out of, and then they escape and they live happily ever after.
That's the best ever. Was that like inspiration for Hunchback of Notre Dame, do you think?
I don't know. I guess you'd have to Google Hunchback of Notre Dame to see which happened first.
I suppose.
Yes, that was Hop Frog. I thought that was a really interesting one.
I love it.
All right, Cece, you want to finish up the last one? I felt like this one was just very apt for Poe and really signified and symbolized his life and his path to glory.
So that would be his 1849 El Dorado, which was, which was a poem about a knight that spent his whole life searching for the fabled city of gold, the infamous El Dorado. And on his deathbed, he is shown the way to the Valley of Shadow. And this is really thought to be a comparison to his own life, in which he spent searching for fame with his writings, only to die before he sees any real glory. He is taken into the shadow instead of being taken to the city of gold.
Yeah, I think it's sad that, like the knight, all he wanted was to search for El Dorado, and he never got to see it. And Poe never got the fame that he really did reach. He reached ultimate fandom, and he never got to see really any of it. And that's just really sad. I think he would really be proud of himself for what he has accomplished in being the father of horror and all of the things. Like, he should be proud.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And I think, well, I mean, there's also, I guess there's another line in there. But he grew old, this knight so bold, and o'er his heart a shadow fell as he found no spot of ground that looked like El Dorado. And he never saw it.
Nope, never got to. You know what I would love, though, is that John Allan, he should see how famous and infamous Poe is. You know, he always said Poe would never amount to anything, and, you know, he was a big disappointment, but here he is, having way more notoriety than John Allan as a businessman, and he had this, you know, lots of business, and he was pretty big in his time. Yeah. So that concludes our second part of our 2-part episode with Edgar Allan Poe, as we continue down our spooky path for Halloween. We hope that you join us next time as we talk about all of the fun and various ways that people have been tortured throughout the ages. Yes.
Cecilia's extra excited about this. We were talking about it. You're going to hear lots of ooh and oh from Cecilia, because I'm just not going to be able to contain myself.
So, spoiler alert for the next few episodes, it is definitely rated R or for mature audiences only.
Heck yeah. I mean, not that we just haven't been that all along.
That's right. So, see you next time, and thank you so much for joining us here at Histories Uncharted. See you next time. Hey there, everyone. We just wanted to take a minute to thank you for listening to us here at Histories Uncharted. We know you have lots of options to listen to, and we are super grateful you chose to share this hour with us. As a brand new podcast, it takes a lot to get started in the beginning. So if you could please rate us, follow us, leave a comment, or share our podcast with someone you think would like to hear a cool story. Do one or all three, but whatever you do, we would love to hear from you.